What if the most brutal way to defeat an army is not to fight it, but to make it irrelevant? February 19, 1944. Far below the surface, in the buried command complex at Rabaul on New Britain, Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusoka bent over his journal like a man writing a confession. His brush hand shook, not from age or fatigue, but from the knowledge that one line of ink, if discovered by Tokyo, could cost him his life. Still he wrote the thought he could no longer silence. The Americans are not fighting us. They are strangling us. Above his head, the bunker's vents carried the dull thunder of B-24 Liberators crossing overhead, not for invasion, not for annihilation, but for the steady, suffocating bombardment that had become as predictable as dawn itself. Rabaul, once the showcase fortress of Japan's Pacific Empire, 100,000 men, 5 airfields, tunnels, fuel depots, guns, planes, and the reputation of impregnability, was now dying not by battle, but by abandonment. The Americans had made a decision more devastating than assault. Rabaul would not be attacked. It would be ignored. Japan had built a war doctrine on a single assumption. Fortresses force battle. Battle bleeds the enemy white. Blood buys time. Time buys survival. Tokyo believed that ringed island bastions, across the Bonins, the Marianas, New Guinea, the Carolines, would force the US into ruinous assaults, each costing thousands of lives. Tojo declared the absolute defense line, a wall of heroic last stands. At Rabaul, General Amura commanded 50,000 elite troops dug into a volcanic citadel and bragged that the Americans would break like surf against concrete. But the Americans did something Japan had never planned for. They walked around the fortress. First at Woodlark and Carowena, then at New Georgia, then at Cape Gloucester. They did not storm the walls. They amputated the supply life behind them. They seized only airfields, not armies. They took not the fortress, but its relevance. Japanese officers at first sneered. These are cowards' landings, avoiding honorable battle. But Captain Toshio Takahashi at Rabaul was the first to see the pattern with dread clarity. They are not closing in on us. They are making us irrelevant. On New Georgia, 10,000 Japanese fought to hold the island. The Americans seized only Munda Airfield and then stopped. The rest of the garrison was simply left to rot in the jungle. Alive, armed, useless. Operation Cartwheel was not a campaign of conquest. It was a campaign of suffocation. By late 1943, Japan committed its last seasoned carrier pilots, the Pearl Harbor and Midway veterans, to Rabaul for its final stand. Within weeks, U.S. carriers struck once, twice, then simply left again. Of 173 planes sent to defend the fortress, only 52 survived, and still the Americans did not land. They had no need. Without fuel, without food, without reinforcement, the unassailable bastion became a sealed tomb. By mid-1944, the fortress was eating itself. Soldiers grew taro and sweet potatoes where they had once loaded bombs. Officers bartered fish for medicine. Malaria outran ammunition. One officer wrote bitterly, "We trained to die like warriors. Now we farm." And it was not just Rabaul. Across the Pacific, the same quiet execution unfolded. Wake Island's guns rusted while its men starved, waiting for an invasion that never came. At WWII and WW2I, garrisons watched American fleets sail past within cannon range, never firing, never stopping. A Japanese commander wrote, "We are not defeated. We are discarded." The Americans had turned time itself into a weapon. While Japanese forces withered unseen on bypassed islands, American engineers built runways, ports, depots, concrete arteries of endless supply. As Admiral Ugoki later admitted with despair, "We're prepared for a war of warriors. They fought a war of engineers." The consequences rippled outward. Veteran airmen stranded at forgotten bases meant that by the time Japan fought the Battle of the Philippine Sea, its carriers were manned by green cadets. The result was slaughter. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. 600 aircraft lost in 2 days. The fortresses that were meant to save Japan had instead bled its future dry. When the emperor finally surrendered in 1945, 69,000 troops still sat in Rabaul, armed, fortified, unbroken. Having never fired a shot, across the Pacific more than 300,000 Japanese soldiers ended the war not dead, not captured, not defeated, but erased. A surviving officer wrote, "We feared not death, but meaninglessness. We were ready to die. Instead we were forgotten." Years later, Kusaka, who had once written the forbidden truth in that bunker, summarized the lesson with bitterness. The Americans discovered something crueler than killing, to make the enemy matter no longer. The island hopping strategy did not merely bypass garrisons. It bypassed the very assumption that war is decided by combat. It proved that a fortress is only powerful if someone chooses to attack it. And that sometimes the deadliest weapon in war is strategic indifference. The most painful way to lose a war is not to be destroyed, but to be made irrelevant. 询问 ChatGPT